Jesus' metaphors of the lost sheep and the lost coin in Luke 15 are so moving that they make their way into songs. When people give their testimonies, this idea of being the one that was lost and the 99 that was left behind, they're beautiful demonstrations of the goodness of God, and they get stuck in our brains. But I think one of the things that we are missing is that these passages are a scathing critique on the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And I'm going to point out three things in these texts that'll really open up what Jesus is doing in this text, not only so that you can see the beautiful grace and mercy of Jesus, but also maybe even check yourself and see if you belong, or if I belong, in the category of the Pharisees and teachers of the law. And the third point that I'm going to tell you at the end is probably the biggest jab at these religious leaders and the one we need to pay most attention to. But we got to read the text to get there. Luke 15, starting in verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who did not need to repent. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So the first thing we need to take note of is the fact that the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were the target audience for these parables, and they're the target audience because they were upset about the fact that Jesus was eating with tax collectors and sinners. So knowing that they are the target audience helps us to know that it's not really about the lost sheep and the lost coin, or at least the protagonists of these stories are trying to demonstrate something to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And Jesus' selection of the protagonist is brilliant here. He chooses a shepherd and a poor woman. While sheep are technically clean, according to kosher laws, the Pharisees and teachers of the law would have likely perceived shepherds as an unclean profession, even if not because of the animals and having to live outdoors, at least because their profession would have kept them from engaging in the regular religious life of townsfolk because they had to be out in pasture. And the selection of the woman, who only has 10 coins, likely her dowry. And Pharisees and teachers of the law would have likely found it distasteful to identify themselves, one, with a woman, and two, with a poor woman. And so Jesus makes the hero of the story the analog for God in both of these stories, people that the Pharisees would have considered to be distasteful to identify with. Next, Jesus emphasizes how proactive the protagonist is. The shepherd goes out to find the sheep. The woman sweeps her whole house to look for the coin. Historical side note, if you are wondering why she's sweeping to find a coin, it's because poor folks lived in homes with rough stone floors, and these were like the ancient equivalent of the couch cushions, where random stuff gets jammed in there and lost for ages. In fact, archaeologists oftentimes will look for coins in those cracks in order to help date ancient structures, because it was such a common occurrence for shards of pottery or coins or whatever to fall in those cracks. And the woman sweeps out those cracks to try to find that coin. So the Pharisees and teachers of the law, one, they wouldn't have used that woman and that shepherd as the protagonist, but second, in whatever version of these stories that they would have told, they would have probably said, "And the shepherd waited for the sheep to correct its behavior and come on home." Forgiveness for people who repent was taught. It's not a new concept. However, the new thing that Jesus is doing is he's saying that the protagonist, the God figure, not only waits for people to come home, waits for people to ask for forgiveness and repent, but rather goes out searching and looking for the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost person, which should be ringing some bells when you think about the setup of this, because the tax collectors and the sinners are the lost folks that Jesus is going out to get. He's not waiting for them to repent and walk through the doors of the synagogue, or like modern language, walk through the doors of our churches, but rather he goes out and gets them while they are still lost. In the cracks, out in the mountains, wherever it is that they are lost, this sheep and coin is worth it to go be found. And now the third observation, the bring it home point of each of these parables, is the ending and what the protagonist does once they find the lost object. Jesus says, the shepherd calls his friends and neighbors to celebrate with him and says, rejoice with me. The woman calls together her friends and neighbors and says, rejoice with me. We know what friends means, but even the word neighbor carries the implication of closeness of relationship. And so what Jesus is saying here is, if you are my friend and you are my neighbor, when I find my lost sheep and my lost coin, I'm gonna call you to celebrate with me. Do you get the implication? If you are not celebrating with the shepherd, if you are not celebrating with the woman, you are not their friend. And this is what Jesus is saying. Hey, I'm out looking for lost people. And when I find them, my friends and my neighbors, they're gonna celebrate with me. And if you are not celebrating, you're probably not my friend, or you're not my neighbor. So do you want to be a friend of Jesus or a friend of God? I think Jesus's parable is clear. It means that we celebrate when God and God's people are going out to rescue folks and are bringing them home. And historically, you can look through the different ages and find who were the most detestable people to the people of God, to religious folks. Tax collectors and sinners, Gentiles, prostitutes. Here in America for a while, it was the hippies, and each time that the people of God go out to seek the lost, there's also another group of people, religious folks, who are like, I don't want them in my church. And so if we are going to heed the words and the warning of Jesus in these two parables in Luke 15, and there's like even a bigger point in the rest of Luke 15 with the parable of the lost son, but that'll take a whole nother video to unpack. If we want to be like Jesus, then we act like the protagonist and we go out looking for the lost. If we want to be friends with the protagonist, we want to be friends with God and friends with heaven, then we rejoice when the lost are found. So let's be Jesus followers that do what Jesus does and cares about what Jesus cares about. Go team, go.